Ever wonder what happens when planes lose control during landing? If you like planes and like watching planes land, you've probably recently seen this video, and if you haven't seen that video, so did these pilots make the exact same mistake because they're flying the exact same type of plane, a Boeing 777? Did they make the same mistake, or did something else happen? Let's see what happens in this video. Welcome to Pilot Mode, where we explore the details behind aviation disasters. Subscribe for gripping narratives and insightful analysis. Let's see video provided by Big Jet YouTube channel.
Thank you. Look at the vortex coming off the wings, folks. Off the flat tips. I hear that vortex crashing down on me. Listen to it. It's over the top of me now. Oh! 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 Stop it!
Observing the flight controls is one of the most crucial aspects of watching these landings, since they appear to be utilizing a high-quality camera, or perhaps it's just the lighting. We can see what's happening as they attempt to land. From above, it appears like the pilot is performing a common maneuver known as crabbing, and the nose of the aircraft is pointing to the left, indicating that the wind is blowing from that direction. The runway is here, and the plane is getting closer to it. However, the plane's nose is now pointing at an odd angle, making it appear odd. However, this is a skill that we learned very early in flight school in order to land when the wind isn't coming directly down the runway. Although you learn it very early on, it takes a lifetime to perfect because the wind is constantly changing. Its direction, speed, and motion are all swirling. So you have to notice and feel the inputs from the wind and make adjustments to get the plane lined up on the runway. Additionally, in order to maintain the effectiveness of this skill and maintain your aircraft in the center of the runway. Therefore, it's not as simple as learning a skill and having it function flawlessly every time. While that would be the case in a simulator, in real life, gusts occasionally occur that don't shift direction. As a result, you constantly have to adjust to the current situation. To start, notice the order of events here. I want you to focus on the rudder. I'm going to slow it down for you to see. The pilot is currently using some rudder, but observe how the rudder emerges. It actually lines up exactly with the aircraft, indicating that the pilots are not using any rudder at all. The challenge we face when flying in a crosswind is that we can only use one hand to direct the aircraft from left to right. Our feet are used to shift the rudder to the left or right, depending on the direction of the wind, while one hand is used to control the power. In this instance, we use the steer to maintain the aircraft straight or traveling down the runway. Thus, you are using both hands and feet for different tasks. Plenty is happening. Additionally, you must glance outside in order to understand the information your plane is providing you, taking into account the wind and the plane's movements. After processing everything, you must add the required inputs. Increase your power because you're losing speed, or tilt the aircraft to the left or right, depending on how the runway lines up with your position. Utilize the rudders in accordance with the wind's changing direction. Is it blowing gusty? Will it go away? Because the pilots are adjusting all of those inputs to get the plane to line up on the runway, you may feel as though you are being moved around a lot in the back while using all of those things. I mean, it makes sense. As a result, the wind was coming from the side in the previous crab film. This implies that the pilots will genuinely apply rudder pressure to straighten the aircraft. However, the aircraft should return to its original course if the pilot releases the rudder. It didn't really make sense why aliens were using flying saucers, since then they wouldn't have to deal with crosswinds and this kind of strategy. The reason for this is because the wind is actually hitting this side of the plane here, forcing the nose to go towards the direction of the wind. However, a very odd thing occurs. As you can see in the video, at the beginning, the nose is pointing to the left, indicating that's where the wind is coming from. They are using the rudder to direct the aircraft in that direction on the runway. However, as soon as the rudder is released, it appears as though the nose is moving to the right. This suggests that the wind may have changed, which would have made the pilots want to return to the runway. It's not a terrific technique, but the pilots are responding to it quickly, and by doing so, they're really dipping that left wing in an attempt to encourage the jet to lean back to the left. The pilots are interpreting this information, so bear in mind that I'm viewing this from an angle, making it a little difficult to tell exactly what's happening. However, if the wind were to suddenly shift from one side to the other when you come in on a crosswind landing, your natural tendency is to use one foot and push with it somewhat in order to maintain the plane's trajectory down the middle of the runway. Therefore, you're kind of modulating that foot to maintain the plane lined up the way you want it to, depending on whether you need a lot or little rudder. However, it normally only comes from one direction, doesn't often flip around the opposite direction when you land. However, see what transpires. They appear to be lined up and using some rudder to essentially come to a stop right now, unwavering. Furthermore, it appears that the plane's nose is now pointed to the right as they remove the rudder. The pilots are attempting to turn left, as indicated by the left aileron pulling down, which suggests they are most likely on the right side of the runway. This could also mean that when the pilots were approaching, they were aligned with the runway, but not correctly. By applying the rudder, they are attempting to maintain the plane's alignment, but if they are not applying enough wing correction, the plane will remain level with the runway. At this point, you remove the rudder and attempt to push the wing down to steer left, as that is the obvious way to steer left and right. So when you're staring down the runway, you're thinking, I want to go to the left. I need my wing to go down so we can start there. The issue arises because a large jet cannot be brought down to the ground in such a manner, particularly if it has 4 engines. In such a case, the engines located near the ends of the wings will slam into the ground. So if the aircraft is positioned to the right of the runway, the pilot will naturally instinctively steer to the left. Pilots sometimes try to bring you there by using their wings, but that rarely works out successfully. Even though we're viewing from an angle, it appears that when they remove the rudder, the nose actually moves to the right. This indicates a shift in the wind, which would normally push the plane to the left, but in this case, the wind is pushing it to the right. That's what happens in the real world when the wind just starts shifting. You've probably heard that term used before. It can happen when the wind is shifting as you travel through different elevations and altitudes, or it can just happen when the wind is swirling at the airport you're at. In some places, like Alaska, you'll see windsocks moving in one direction for a short while, then in another direction. Because you, as a pilot, obviously cannot see that as you approach the runway, you must instead react to what your particular aircraft is doing. For example, if you are flying and your plane is like this, and you are getting ready to land, and then you start to get here, and suddenly your plane starts shifting, you will basically have to do everything in reverse. You will need to put in different rudder and aileron, and you will be dealing with a split second, which is extremely rare to witness in real life on a jet. It seems like the winds are moving in the last 20 feet, making it difficult to make the necessary correction. Alternatively, they may have lined up to the side, causing the plane to curve to the left, giving the impression that it is heading right due to the angle. The obvious thing to do in this situation is to circle around the pilot, who was using what is known as a side slip technique, something I was always taught when I went to jet. Because I can't really tell from this angle what the issue is with the plane not aligned with the runway, and it appears like the wind is shifting left and right. Avoid doing it, as it's not anything that up until recently, when I worked on the 747, I would arrive, let the aircraft hover in that position for roughly 10 feet, and then make my repair. Nevertheless, the aircraft uses autopilot when it makes an automatic landing. It will repair a side slip by completing a side cross, just like the pilot you saw there, which is where you input the rudder in opposition to the input you are using for control. Thus, you're essentially maintaining the plane's straight path. Even though the wind is trying to force you in another direction, you're staying the aircraft to fly straight ultimately though. If you begin to dip your wing as you approach, you must maintain it level, which is what flight school teaches you. Next, there's a chance of a pod strike. I don't know why they don't refer to it as an engine strike, which is what happens when an engine strikes the ground. It's known as a pod strike, perhaps because it doesn't sound as bad. Thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our future content. Until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and keep exploring.